most convincing story that maps onto reality, and that's why the central narrative is falling apart.
Right now in the United States, people should not be walking around with masks.
We must see the central narrative for the fiction that it is. We are Americans.
While elections are sometimes messy, this was a secure election.
The founders began the fight for human liberty and self-governance, and it's up to us to finish the job.
I tell you what, we are in a truth emergency right now.
This is the end game.
All the people that have gone out there against the mainstream media and said, you're going to call us racist, you're going to call us potential Timothy McVeighs, fuck you. War.
Immensely seductive. Quite sure he's right. An obsessionally neurotic. Pretty dangerous, in fact.
Do you mean you doubt your powers to convince him?
Worse than that. What I'm afraid of is his power to convince me.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories.
Say it! Say it!
All right, I'll say it.
We're talking about putting a manifestly irresponsible man on national television.
Sweetheart, be reasonable.
All right, it is Monday, February 3rd, 2025, the 15th day of the Golden Age. Here we are again in the Golden Age. And I mean, I got to be honest, it is pretty golden so far. I can't believe how many things that Donald Trump is doing. Every day there are so many things. I don't think that there is any way that I am going to be able to keep up with all of those things, even with 3 hours, even with 3-hour shows. There's just so many things. It's crazy how many things there are. And he's doing it all on his own. And we're going to talk about many of those things that he's doing today. But the important thing to know is that he's done these things already. These are things that we've been talking about for years that we could see happening in the lead up to the fake election last fall. Now they are being implemented and they are being rolled out in attention-grabbing news stories and through various characters from the television show that are now publicly on Donald Trump's side. They're part of the fantasy team, or they are public communicators who are now on the, I should say now on the fantasy team. But also people like Marco Rubio, the senator from Florida, who is now the Secretary of State. A lot of these deals that have been made from the first Trump term developed over the last 4 years during this pause and are now gaining public recognition as American policy. They're being rolled out fast and furious, and it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. Donald Trump has the bully pulpit now being publicly recognized as president once again. Whatever his status was the last 4 years, he was always very good at getting attention and very good at communicating with the American people and getting the American people on his side. But he didn't have that last credential He wasn't called by many people, most people, nearly all people, the president of the United States of America. And many people dismissed him. Everyone in the Uniparty left and Uniparty right, all the neocons, the Ron DeSantis supporters, the Nikki Haley people, all the Maha people, everyone on the quote unquote left, all of those people dismissed Donald Trump because they had determined that while they might be awake enough to oppose rampant illegal migrant crime, illegal alien crime, and while they might be based and red-pilled enough to speak out against the whole transgender LGBT thing and various other brands of wokeness, the race stuff, etc., they weren't willing to abandon their positions in the party of false decorum. And so to signal to their fellow party members, they would, publicly proclaim that they were still smarter than Donald Trump was, that they would know what to do when Donald Trump didn't know what to do. And they would go online to tell Donald Trump that he's done, or that he needs to pipe down, or that he can't say the thing he's saying, or shouldn't be supporting the thing he's supporting. Just whatever anti-Trump point they had to make, even when they were aligned with Donald Trump about the underlying policy, they would say it's good that he's doing that policy or pursuing that policy. It's good that he's championing this cause, but it would be better if he did it in this other way. This is how we would do it. We neocons, we Daily Weimars, we Republican establishment types, we Ron DeSantis supporters. They always knew how Donald Trump was wrong, and that was how they signaled to the rest of the members of the party of false decorum, because even the uniparty left members of the party of false decorum could deal with them saying bad things about transformers and complaining that maybe BLM is not just a grassroots activist organization trying to save Black people, or that maybe women don't get paid only 80 cents on the dollar for the same work. They could talk about illegal aliens and how if they weren't in the country, they wouldn't be killing people and bringing all the drugs in. Those are safe topics, as long as you say that Donald Trump is a Nazi, or that MAGA supporters are stupid, or that Donald Trump is, just not fit to be president because he's always creating all these problems. And so that's how it went along for many years. It went along that way in the first term, went along that way in the second term. And now that's not happening so much anymore. It still happens on the left and on the fringes, but most people are beginning to realize that actually Donald Trump was not a moron who only had 36 or 37% support from the American people. And that's been true for years, of course. It takes some people a really long time to realize it. It took me till, the middle of the first term at least, to realize that something was definitely going on there. And then in 2020, watching the news cover him every day during the very deadly pandemic, it became obvious that everything they were saying about Donald Trump and his supporters and everything they were doing was bullshit. They were just lying to the American public every day. So now Donald Trump is back, publicly recognized as president, and he has the bully pulpit, which means that he gets not only the imprimatur of the office, he's recognized as president. So the news has to cover him. And one of his comms guys today, Stephen Chung, was pointing this out. Hold for processing for just a moment here. He was pointing this out on X, formerly Twitter. And I just kind of want to put this in everybody's heads as we get started today, because I found it very telling. And of course, we have to hold for processing again because my computer, I did something very stupid and I don't know what it is, but now many of my images and videos open in the wrong program and I have not fixed it yet. Stephen Chung today, full spectrum dominance, and he's just showing Trump being covered as he's signing executive orders today in the Oval Office. He's got 10 different news organizations carrying that signing, and his impromptu press conference that has become a Donald Trump Oval Office tradition already after 2 weeks. He takes questions while he's signing executive orders. He has the people there ready to speak about what the order means. It's really been just a top-notch TV show. And I'm not saying anything judgmental at all. There's nothing attached to me saying that this is a TV show. He knows that through broadcasting these executive order signings, he can speak directly to the American people. They can see what he's doing with constitutional executive power from the Oval Office, and he can explain the reasoning for it while reporters ask him questions. He's accessible to the American public through still the mainstream media, which is fine if they are just disseminating what he's doing. I mean, unless the whole thing is only a soap opera and there's just no government at all. That's entirely possible. But he is accessible and he's letting everybody know what's going on. It's almost impossible for the media to make a dent when it comes to any of the subjects they're covering. No one is disputing what Donald Trump is doing. We talked about this a little bit on, and not, I understand, not no one. I'm speaking in exaggerating terms and I shouldn't. Very few people are voicing loud public opposition to the things Donald Trump is doing. Things he is doing. Wow. Can't talk. Can't think. Who knows what's happening right up here ever, you know? The opposition to Donald Trump is minimal compared to what we saw in 2017 and what we saw in 2020. And even what we saw as the media was rolling out the very violent insurrection narrative and how MAGA was anti-science and how we didn't support the Ukraine war, the Israel war enough. Very little pushback. The public understands that Donald Trump has an overwhelming public mandate to do all of these things. Okay. It's more important than any election results could ever be. Donald Trump with the bully pulpit and the public mandate, letting the American public know what is actually going on, what their government has been doing, and how illegitimate that government actually is. And so we're going to get through all those things today. I have just the longest list of notes and subjects. I cannot even imagine. I don't think we're going to get through it all, but we're going to give it a shot. We are living on a prayer. Hello and happy Monday to everyone in the chat. Mary G. Rumbles, $10 Rumble rant just came in. You sent it at the exact right time. She said, thank you, Chris. Thank you. Thank you all very much for your support. Thanks for watching. Let's get on into it. And I want to start with one that is almost so deranged that it is right back around all the way to being hilarious. This can be viewed as extremely disturbing or as the slapstick comedy portion of the program. And of course, I would prefer to focus on the slapstick comedy of it all. So I suggest that we just do that. But if you are still in the horror or action movie genre phase of your awakening process and you are unable to participate in the humor of what's happening right now, I do understand. And I don't mean to trigger you, but let's watch Bill Gates. My friend Patriots in Control grabbed this clip today. Bill Gates says he doesn't understand why there are conspiracy theories about him, then immediately follows that up by saying another pandemic will come and the CDC and WHO need to be prepared. Maybe the conspiracy theories exist because the people who benefit from vaccines are always the ones predicting pandemics. I would say that my friend is correct. Let's go ahead and watch the creepiest man on earth, Bill Gates.
With everything that's been going on in the 2020s, including some of the wild conspiracy theories about you and vaccines, does the world still make sense to you?
You know, things don't always go in a straight line. And if you'd said to me that at a time where we've cut child to death in half since the turn of the century, and the main reason for that is vaccines. And we did save millions of lives during the COVID pandemic because of vaccines, that if you said their reputation would be more confused today than ever, I would have said, are you kidding? You know, people will see that this rotavirus vaccine, which is for diarrhea, or pneumococcus for pneumonia, you know, these are miracles. And we, you know, managed to get these to all the children of the world. And so, you know, instead of 10 million dying every year, we're below 5 million. So I, you know, somebody with a kind of logical view, like I try to have, you know, it is confounding that you have those conspiracy theories. I hope that dies down. You know, the pandemic was a very unusual thing in terms of, you know, the government wanting to stop the spread of it. And yet, you know, how much was that wise? You know, we clearly kept schools closed longer than we should have. You know, we were learning as we were going, and, you know, another pandemic will come. And, you know, how smart are we going to be about, you know, having the CDC and WHO and the tools ready to go? You know, I'm not sure we focused on preparation. Perhaps in the years ahead, we'll get our act together.
So there's another pandemic to come, and hopefully we'll have the CDC and the WHO ready to roll. They'll get everything right, just as they did the last time. Except the problem is the CDC and the WHO wouldn't still exist as part of our government. And you got to wonder what he's talking about there. Are they going to privatize themselves and just operate outside of government, as I suggested months ago? Probably. Yeah, that's probably going to happen. And they'll just keep doing their thing. And certain states will decide to implement policies on the basis of the commands of the WHO and of the CDC. And I just quickly want to hit this while we're on the subject. This is, I guess, a little less funny than creepy Bill Gates, but it's still wonderful. I'm not trying to sound like there's scary news coming. The CDC orders pullback of new scientific papers involving its researchers. Source says, this is from Reuters today. The CDC is seeking to withdraw all papers involving its researchers that are being considered for publication by external scientific journals to allow for a review by the Trump administration, a federal official told Reuters. The sweeping order came in an email from the CDC's chief science officer on Friday, addressed to all division heads at the agency. The official who has seen the email told Reuters the official was not authorized to discuss the matter publicly. So someone is talking about the emails that they are receiving from inside the executive branch agencies, stuff that apparently they're worried about discussing outside, though they're doing it anyway. They're just saying, please don't use my name. I'm doing something I shouldn't be doing, but it's only because the government is doing something so unjust. The review is aimed at removing language to comply with President Donald Trump's executive order, saying the federal government will only recognize two sexes, male and female. So the list of specific words targeted for removal in the communications review include gender, transgender, LGBT, and non-binary. The federal official said that such a list went out from CDC to its divisions. And this is kind of above and beyond the stoppage of communications just a week or so ago. Wasn't quite 2 weeks ago, but yeah, maybe it was that first week. It's all going so quickly now. So they are pulling back their papers from scientific publication if they have the gender agenda baked into the cake of those papers. You have to wonder how many papers are exclusively about gender nonsense. And really interesting. I wonder if we'll see I wonder if this is going to kind of set a baseline for articles coming from these government-linked health organizations actually being published in these quote-unquote scientific journals, because, of course, Trump stood up the science board as well. There might be people within the administration reviewing the science on a number of subjects and suggesting that government agencies no longer attempt to publish in external journals any of their agenda-oriented science. And sadly, most of the quote-unquote science is agenda-oriented. You got to love seeing stuff like this. It's not science, and it should not be able to carry the credentials of being authoritative, of being any sort of official story, when it is just inverted false reality nonsense, like men can be women, or that the parts don't actually dictate the sex. It's the only thing that does it. Okay. So presidential power right there. The president is the plenary authority of the executive branch. And there was an article today in the Federalist that spends considerable time on this concept. And we don't have to go all the way through the article, but sometimes articles like this are wonderful because they put a lot of stuff together in very short form. And if you want to go out and research the topics deeply, you can. But if presidents can't control executive agencies, elections are fake. This, according to Joy Pullman. And actually, let's just take a second. We'll come back to this in just a moment. But on the topic of elections being fake, of course, we already know that they are. This is Liz Harrington today, former Trump spokesperson Liz Harrington on X, formerly Twitter. What happened to the red wave in 2022? Well, in just 7 states, there were 2,189,483 voters who do not exist. 4,840,975 who voted from addresses they did not live at. 1,449,054 more votes than voters. Oh, how does it happen? 8,479,512 unverified votes in California, Georgia, Illinois, Michigan, New York, Ohio, and Pennsylvania alone. 21.6% of the total. And 3,038,081 certified votes later edited, deleted, or washed to other registration records. And so there is an article that she links to in the Daily Caller by a woman named Marley Hornick, who has been involved in election integrity work and advocacy since 2020. She's done a ton of work on all this stuff, a lot of work on how many fake voter registries there are in New York, how they are laundered, and how they are deployed. 21.6% of the vote in these states alone is unverified. Voters who do not exist, voters who voted from addresses where they do not live, and 1.5 million more votes than voters. This is in the 2022 midterm elections. That should have been a red wave if our elections were real and if the reported results accurately reflected the will and intent of the voters. Then it would have been a red wave. And we wouldn't have had to deal with 2023 and 2024 to the extent that the government was actually doing anything. Now, I don't believe the government was actually doing anything. And we covered that throughout this time. The congressional hearings are obviously totally fake. The fake president obviously doesn't have the power to do this, or he's implementing a Donald Trump program, or these are the sorts of things that will be easily removed and washed away in whatever period follows this. And that is what we're seeing now in large part. And people say, oh, but the destruction. And yes, there was some measure of destruction. Some of that was the people destroying things on their own in response to learning that the world was a way different than they thought it was initially. And there's been some of that throughout the process. And of course, we've all had to deal with that, whether it's in our work lives or in our personal lives or whatever. we've had some of the jolts that other people experienced just a little bit earlier. So we were able to observe those jolts for what they were rather than the emotional and dramatic jolts that other people were having because of the emotion and the drama in the stories they were learning to be true for the first time as those stories would cycle through on reruns. And, we're going to see maybe a little later on, if we get to it, how some of the Ukraine stuff has been nonsense from the beginning, as we have covered for now for 3 years. It was late February of 2022 when the very brutal invasion began. That whole narrative. So some of these stories have just been around for a long time, and we've had to factor them into our thinking the whole time. And doing that has provided us, I believe, with insights that are not being provided by others and have not been provided by others. Could we have skipped over a lot of the hardship of 2023 and 2024 if we had known that elections were totally fake, and if the public had understood that in 2020 or in 2022? Did it have to be this way? Maybe it did, so that everybody could see how it was. But a lot of the devastation that we've observed, or more accurately been told about over the last few years, is on a story level, a narrative level, that is not fully representative of what it is at an actual level, which is not to deny that there's any actual. There's always some actual. Well, not always, but often some actual. But it's nonetheless represented later on a timeline, as we've talked about before, or it's blown up, or it's minimized in the retelling of it. And again, a lot of these things are reruns. Okay, so let's get into some of what the article goes through. Again, if presidents can't control executive agencies, elections are fake. Elections are fake. But she's right, of course, about the executive agencies. This is, again, Joy Pullman in The Federalist. So we're just going to run quickly through this list she provides. The Trump administration sought the firing or retirements of numerous top FBI and DOJ personnel and an accounting of all FBI personnel involved in the January 6th, 2021 prosecutions. Wonderful. Directing an internal probe into the DOJ's abuse of a post-Enron obstruction statute that the Supreme Court said the department used unlawfully to imprison right-leaning Capitol protesters with the help of Constitution-hating federal judges. Indeed, and they also went after Donald Trump for the same. CIA mouthpiece Ken Delanian complained on NBC, "This is probably the biggest purge in the modern history of the FBI, and we're talking about most of the senior leadership at the Bureau." So just decades of building the corrupt police state, the regime's police force at the FBI, wiped away by Donald Trump. The Office of Personnel Management and USAID, and we're going to talk about USAID a lot today, are also posing prominent test cases for how the Trump administration can reform a federal bureaucracy that has, by design, resisted elected control since its inception. So we have a federal bureaucracy in the executive branch, many of them obviously, that we're told are somehow independent from the president. They're actually providing a check on the president from within the executive branch. And we're told that that's how the founders intended. There are supposed to be all these checks on presidential power. Well, yeah, in the courts so that he can't do anything unconstitutional. And by Congress, because they're the ones who write the laws. Having executive branch agencies that the country, or that the, gosh, I cannot speak today, that the president cannot control is preposterous. And that should be obvious. The administration is considering folding USAID into the State Department and the Department of Government Efficiency Doge. Elon Musk claimed early Monday that Trump supports doing so as well. The two agencies have long engaged in power struggles. And as we'll see later on, Marco Rubio has assumed the position, the role of administrator of USAID because it's been brought back under the State Department. Much like it seems the Fed and the IRS have been brought under Treasury. USAID is widely perceived as a CIA front organization. Former State Department official Mike Benz says USAID has funded international censorship and regime change operations. We're going to see some of that later. And let's continue on down here. Actually, we'll come back to this when we get into some more of the USAID stuff. But let's move to some more directly Trump-related stuff, what the administration is doing, big picture, and then we'll move back into some of that because there's so much going on in foreign policy as well. So this is just from this afternoon. Trump orders the creation of a U.S. sovereign wealth fund, says it could buy TikTok. How about that? Donald Trump is going to direct the purchase of TikTok. Imagine thinking about that like 2 years ago, and then it just happens. U.S. President Donald Trump signed an executive order on Monday ordering the creation of a sovereign wealth fund within the next year, saying it could potentially buy the short video app TikTok. Trump offered little in the way of detail and was unclear how such a wealth fund would work. Typically, such wealth funds rely on a country's budget surplus to make investments, but the U.S. operates at a deficit. Its creation would also likely require approval from Congress. Would it? Would it? Or could it just be under Treasury? I bet it's the second one. They're going to say it's the first one to make it seem like Trump can't do the thing or there's some big dispute about it. And if there's a dispute about it, wonderful. Take it to the courts. Let's have the dispute settled. And better yet, if the courts don't settle it the right way, well, then let's take it to the people. Because the court of public opinion is all that matters. And it seems like Donald Trump is very, very in tune with the court of public opinion. And as I've suggested on this show for years, I think that's because wherever all the information is in that great cloud in the sky, where it is analyzed by algorithms we can't imagine, it seems like Trump and Trump team have had access to that information for a very long time. So they actually do know what everybody's thinking at once, right? And they can get that information right down to the individual in real time. We are going to create a lot of wealth for the fund, Trump told reporters. And I think it's about time this country had a sovereign wealth fund. Trump had previously floated such a government investment vehicle as a presidential candidate, saying it could fund great national endeavors like infrastructure projects, such as highways and airports, manufacturing, and medical research. Administration officials did not say how the fund would operate or be financed, but Trump has previously said it could be funded by tariffs and other intelligent things. Intelligent things. Interesting. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent told reporters the fund would be set up within the next 12 months, and we can just hear from Trump and Bessent directly. Hold for processing. This is right on my Truth Social today.
Is there any chance that Canada or China could also get out of the tariffs after you struck a deal with Mexico?
Well, nobody's out with Mexico. We had a great talk with Mexico, and we had President Sheinbaum is a woman. I like her very much, and we've had good relationships, but we have to stop fentanyl from coming in, whether I like somebody or not.
Oh, cool. So I totally mislabeled that clip, and that's the one we're going to listen to later. Crushing it today so far. Absolutely crushing it. Let's try this one.
That Canada or China could also get out of the tariffs after you struck a deal with Mexico?
Well, nobody's out with Mexico. We had a great talk with Mexico, and we had President Sheinbaum is a woman. I like her very much. We've had good relationships, but we have to stop fentanyl from coming in, whether I like somebody or not, and we have to stop the illegal aliens.
I mean, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? I have sabotaged myself. Hours and hours of show prep just set on fire. Oh, it's fantastic. Oh, we're having fun, everybody. We are having fun. Let's go ahead and actually find where Scott Bessent is, because I sure did have it before. It's a miracle. Hold for processing. We're going to do this the old-fashioned way. Hopefully. Where are we here? So he's got Scott Bessent and Howard Lutnick here to sign the Sovereign Wealth Fund. And now we are all the way there. Here we are.
Secretary of Commerce Howard Lutnick to begin a process that will hopefully result in the creation of an American Sovereign Wealth Fund.
It's a very exciting event. We're going to have a sovereign wealth fund, which we've never had. We have a lot of things that create wealth, and you're seeing that over the last 2 weeks. I think we've created more wealth. Other people have created de-wealth. The people, my predecessors, we're creating a lot of wealth. Scott, maybe you'd like to say something about it, and I'd ask also Howard to say something about it.
Yes, sir. This is very exciting. We're going to stand this thing up within the next 12 months. We're going to monetize the asset side of the U.S. balance sheet for the American people. We're going to put the assets to work. And I think it's going to be very exciting. We're going to study best practices that's done around the world. It'll be a combination of liquid assets, assets that we have in this country as we work to bring them out for the American people.
The extraordinary size and scale of the U.S. government and the business it does with companies should create value for American citizens. If we are going to buy 2 billion COVID vaccines, maybe we should have some warrants and some equity in these companies and have that grow for the help of the American people. So I bring all these things together. I think Scott and I will create an amazing sovereign wealth fund for you, sir.
So other countries have sovereign wealth funds, and they're much smaller countries, and they're not the United States. We have tremendous potential in this country, tremendous. You're seeing that, what's happened just in a short period of time. And as an example, TikTok, we're going to be doing something perhaps with TikTok, and perhaps not. If we make the right deal, we'll do it. Otherwise, we won't. But I have the right to do that. And we might put that in the sovereign wealth fund, whatever we make, or if we do a partnership with very wealthy people. A lot of options, but we could put that as an example in the fund. And we have a lot of other things that we could put in the fund. And I think in a short period of time, we'd have one of the biggest funds. And, you know, some of them are pretty large, I must tell you. Some of the, like the Saudi Arabia fund is on the large side, but eventually we'll catch it. But we're going to create a lot of wealth for the fund. And I think it's about time that this country had a sovereign wealth fund. And these two gentlemen and some others are going to work with them very closely, and they'll be heading it up, and they're going to do a great job. Two highly respected people that have done unbelievably well in the world, in the real world. So that's
in the real world, they've done unbelievably well. I think, by the way, the size of that Saudi Arabian sovereign wealth fund is $8 trillion. So does it sound like we're going to have a debt problem in the future? A lot of people would say that Donald Trump is just full of shit. You know, the people who somehow still think that they are smarter than Donald Trump would be like, he can't do that. He's not going to have any sovereign wealth fund. Ha ha ha. It's going to be real. Huh. Let's see Donald Trump build a sovereign wealth fund after getting us out of $37 trillion in debt. It's going to take 3 Donald Trump lifetimes. No. As I've said many times, you cannot be $37 trillion in debt to the people you're at war with if you are the winner of that war. As soon as you win the war, you are not in debt anymore to the people you have defeated. That's just one of those rules. Let's go to Scott Bessent in the New York Times over the weekend, or at least a picture of Scott Bessent. Elon Musk's team now has full access to Treasury's payment systems. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent gave representatives of the so-called Doge full access to the federal payment system late on Friday, according to 3 people familiar with the change, handing Elon Musk and the team he is leading a powerful tool to monitor and potentially limit government spending. The new authority follows a standoff this week with a top Treasury official who had resisted allowing Mr. Musk's lieutenants into the department's payment system, which sends out money on behalf of the entire federal government. The official, a career civil servant named David Lebrick, was put on leave and then suddenly retired on Friday after the dispute, according to people familiar with his exit. The system could give the Trump administration another mechanism to attempt to unilaterally restrict disbursement of money approved for specific purposes by Congress, a push that has faced legal roadblocks. Mr. Musk, who has been given wide latitude by President Trump to find ways to slash government spending, has recently fixated on Treasury's payment processes, criticizing the department in a social media post on Saturday for not rejecting more payments as fraudulent or improper. And so what's subtly mentioned there is this additional mechanism to give Trump this unilateral control to restrict spending that he doesn't like in the government. And we have been told that he doesn't actually have the ability to do that, but of course he does. And this will ultimately be one of the ways that we are led to a legal challenge and a challenge in the court of public opinion over the Impoundment Act of 1974. I'm not sure if I played this clip on the podcast a couple months back, but Russ Vought appeared on Tucker Carlson's show for a long interview, a very informative interview. But one of the most interesting parts was this segment. I think it was about 40 minutes into the podcast. And he discussed different ways that things needed to change within the executive branch to get the government back under control. So part one was that he wanted the idea of independent agencies within the executive branch to just be done away with. It's nonsense. It's not constitutional. It's not how the thing actually works. They keep the illusion of independence so that if an anti-regime president ever leads the executive branch, their independence is what gives them the cover in the court of public opinion, and they believe legally, although not really, to subvert the president and to subvert the will of the people when they give an anti-regime president a public mandate like this. These things have been built into the system to deal with the possibility that someone like Donald Trump might arise. And skipping over the second for a moment, the third was to make the employees of the federal government fireable again. And so we're going to see all of these things actually in today's episode. But I want to focus right now on the impoundment part of the Russ Vought presentation. So this was the second part of 3 that he gave to Tucker Carlson. Check this out. This is about 3 minutes long, by the way. But I think the whole thing is worth it.
Is, I think, first and foremost. Number 2, bring back the notion of impoundment. And this is something that... Of what? Of impoundment. The ability to not spend money For 200 years, presidents had the ability to not spend a congressional appropriation. That has always been the constitutional system. It had been brought, it had been a paradigm that had been brought from the UK and how we understood. The constitutional principle is certainly power of the purse means that Congress gets to set the ceiling. You can't spend without a congressional appropriation, but you weren't ever meant to be forced to spend it, and it has become a floor. So 200 years, presidents are using impoundment. They get money for something. The president says, I don't think it's a good idea, or I certainly can do it better, or I have events that are happening overseas that cause me not to want to spend on the gunboat when I want to get some treaty done. All manner of executive decision making that would be a part of that. In the 1970s, at the lowest moment of the presidency, Congress steps in, and to some extent the courts, and they passed the Impoundment Control Act, which was really the Impoundment Elimination Act. And from that moment, they had destroyed separation of powers on spending and on fiscal issues. But it was beyond that. It wasn't just about dollars and cents. It was about control of the bureaucracy.
So that law effectively meant the executive branch, the president's agencies, have to spend every dollar they're sent by the Congress.
Correct. And I believe, as a budget guy, that was the original sin on why we can't do anything fiscally from that moment on. It's also why we get omnibus bills, because if I only need you to get your signature and I lose all of my ability to, throughout the rest of the fiscal year, to push and pull and not spend and make different decisions, I just got to get your one signature. So I'm going to put everything in that one bill,
right,
thousands of pages, and I'm going to push it through at the hardest time for you politically. You might have some diplomatic visit that you're going on.
Yeah, totally.
And so impoundment is vitally important, not just to save the country fiscally. It is vitally important to be able to wrest control of the bureaucracy, because when you combine Congress giving the agencies vast authority to interpret the laws that they passed, overly broad, make law essentially that has no repercussions on the people who voted it, right? They don't have to vote on what the right blend is for ethanol.
That's right.
And then you say that your funding is going for Congress, and the president has no ability. Sorry, Mr. President, you don't have to. That's illegal. You can't turn off my funding. Now, Imperial Congress still exists, just a lot more subtle. So that's number 2, bringing back impoundment. Number 3 is dramatically going at restoring at-will employment as far as you can.
So there you have it. He explains it throughout, and we're going to see the opposite case made by the media as this year goes on and Trump eliminates various forms of spending that the Congress will say it's already committed. The idea then being that the regime's, the uniparty's representatives in Congress and the Senate can force the executive branch to keep programs running and spending all this money, even if the president doesn't want to, which of course would mean then that the president can't eliminate those agencies or organizations, or even the spending commitments to non-governmental organizations and the rest of it. I should mention, by the way, we were talking about the Sovereign Wealth Fund. The Sovereign Wealth Fund, in addition to being a vehicle for Trump to buy TikTok, it is also probably a drainage destination. And keep that in mind as we see the Sovereign Wealth Fund increase and we get stories about what sorts of money are flowing into it. I wonder if seized assets, already seized Bitcoin, et cetera, are going to be flooding into that sovereign wealth fund. There's talk of course, strategic reserves of cryptocurrencies. Strategic stockpile is how Jason Lowry in Soft War refers to what the U.S. government should be doing as far as acquiring Bitcoin. In the future, that sovereign wealth fund is going to become really interesting. But continuing on with this Treasury business, part of the leftist freakout over all of this, Elon Musk, the guy that no one can be, that no one on the left or in the uniparty can trust, he is getting right up in the guts of, that's not the right way to say that. He's getting all up in the mix of the US government's spending. He's going to be able to follow all of the money. All of the money will be followed from the source. Occasionally, you get the destination of that money, and you can try to follow the money back. And sometimes you can get all the way there, but often you'll like hit a brick wall through the web of NGOs and philanthropic foundations and the rest of it, or organizations like USAID giving it to an NGO. And then there's no, you can never get the full chain, because somewhere in there are private organizations, private individuals who don't have to report anything, intelligence organizations, various forms of money laundering. They make it really difficult. But now I think maybe with this, it's going to be easier to match the source to the destination. I'm hopeful of that. I think with the analytic tools that are being developed through AI, and man, people are doing some insane stuff with the programming now. Many people, I don't even know. I think it was Peter Berniger who did it, but someone's done this incredible, someone in the chat can post it, just this incredible visualization of where all the NGO money goes. But now we're talking like the entire federal government. Elon was very vocal on X, formerly Twitter, over the weekend, talking about how the Treasury officials would basically just have to rubber stamp fraud all day long. There were no checks, there were no checks on what the spending was, whatever got sent to them. They just kind of had to go ahead and sign off on. Crazy situation. So there's a bit of a freak out going on, and they're trying to figure out who's getting all this information, who's going to know everything about what our government's actually been doing. Well, this was Wired yesterday. The young, inexperienced engineers aiding Elon Musk's government takeover. And let's just go through a little bit of this, because they've figured out who it is. Elon Musk's takeover of federal government infrastructure is ongoing, and at the center of things is a coterie of engineers who are barely out of, and in at least one case, purportedly still in college. Most have connections to Musk, and at least two have connections to Musk's longtime associate, Peter Thiel, a co-founder and chair of the analytics firm and government contractor Palantir, who has long expressed opposition to democracy. Peter Thiel is JD Vance's owner. Peter Thiel and Reid Hoffman were at a billionaire confab in Sun Valley, Idaho, having a public shouting match over martyring Donald Trump. 2 days later, we had the assassination event. 2 days after that, JD Vance was named as the running mate in the fake campaign leading up to the fake election by none other than Donald Trump on Truth Social. That Peter Thiel. Wired has identified 6 young men, all apparently between the ages of 19 and 24, according to public databases, their online presences, and other records, who have little to no government experience and are now playing critical roles in Musk's so-called Department of Government Efficiency project, tasked by executive order with modernizing federal technology and software to maximize governmental efficiency and productivity. The engineers all hold nebulous job titles within DOGE, and at least one appears to be working as a volunteer. And, you know, there are people on the other side who will tell you that DOGE isn't even a real government agency. And the thing is, we've been talking about that for a long time, and it doesn't matter. Why? Because it is serving the narrative purpose as intended. And Its status as a government agency is irrelevant. Donald Trump is the plenary authority for what can become public information in the American government. He can have any information released to the public that is under his purview. I think that Treasury information is something he could choose to release or could choose to assign access to whenever he wants. He is the plenary authority on classification and information. The Treasury is under the executive branch. He's the plenary authority of the executive branch. Elon Musk, if Kash Patel is to be believed, and I believe that he is the number one defense contractor. And it's hard not to see that as being true because he has so many companies as a private businessman that are linked directly to the U.S. Defense Department. So that's not hard to believe at all. So Donald Trump, to make the government efficient and to clean up all the waste, fraud, and abuse on behalf of the American people, from whom he has an overwhelming public mandate, he's employing defense contractors to analyze information. Is that a national security risk, or is that exactly what we told Donald Trump to do last fall? I think it's the second. But that's not okay. It's a threat to national security. Elon Musk, the private businessman, and even people like, by the way, Whitney Webb, who's a good researcher. What is that chick doing? She's the most black-pilled person on earth. And now she's upset that Elon Musk, the private businessman, is doing these things. Elon Musk isn't a private businessman. You cannot be a Defense Department contractor and just a quote unquote private businessman. You're under a Defense Department contract. Elon Musk already has top level security clearances. What are these people talking about? And again, I'm very clear that I think there are plenty of people to be concerned about. One of them, Peter Thiel, by the way, within the tech bro and Defense Department contractor arena. But I don't pretend that they're just private businessmen influencing the world, and that if Donald Trump gave them access, then that wouldn't be rightful. So I don't know what to say about that. That is such a weird complaint. I think that complaint is going to look silly in the future. And I'm not even trying to say bad things about the people making that complaint, other than if you had not spent the last 4 years analyzing the government as though Joe Biden won a real election and was a real legitimate president, you wouldn't be having these problems. The 6 men are one part of the broader project of Musk allies assuming key government positions. Already Musk's lackeys, of course, they've got to be lackeys. They can't just be employees. Aren't these federal government employees? Or are they just the employees of Defense Department contractors? Again, if they were deep state, if they were uniparty aligned, if they were part of that government bureaucracy and Defense Department contractors, these people would not be complaining. These people are actually complaining that those people are losing their jobs just because they don't actually ever go to work and stuff, or because they've been involved in treason. Already Musk's lackeys, including more senior staff from XAI, Tesla, and the Boring Company, have taken control of the Office of Personnel Management and General Services Administration and have gained access to the Treasury Department's payment system, potentially allowing him access to a vast range of sensitive information about tens of millions of citizens, businesses, and more. On Sunday, CNN reported that DOJ personnel attempted to improperly access classified information and security systems at the U.S. Agency for International Development, and that top USAID security officials who thwarted the attempt were subsequently put on leave. The Associated Press reported that DOJ personnel has indeed accessed classified material. Okay, so there were government employees, or more accurately, employees of an extra governmental organization like USAID, who were trying to stop the president's appointed representative to do this exact job under the purview of the president, with information over which the president is the plenary authority. Those employees lost their jobs, and that's supposed to be a scandal. Amazing, isn't it? And I don't know, this story and these young employees, it sounds like there's the hook in that story, and that the hook is that these employees are so young and so inexperienced. It's kind of funny. It's a good way to get a story like this to go really wide. And I love it when that happens, because underlying this is the point that Donald Trump actually can have all this information. And if it's between Trump and the deep state, the American public is totally okay with Donald Trump having this information instead. Again, the lack of forceful blowback is proof of the public mandate. Better proof than any election result reported through Edison reporting could ever give to us. Let us continue. So Donald Trump has put out, we talked about this a little bit on Devolution Power Hour on Saturday night. He's put out an executive order on collective bargaining agreements for public sector unions, federal employee unions, limiting lame duck collective bargaining agreements that improperly attempt to constrain the new president. Here we are. I forgot to share my screen. There we go. In the final days of the prior administration's tenure, it purposefully finalized collective bargaining agreements with federal employees in an effort to harm my administration by extending its wasteful and failing policies beyond its time in office. For example, the Department of Education negotiated a CBA on January 17th, 2025, 3 days before I took office, that generally prohibits the agency from returning remote employees to their offices. So that would be in direct violation of a Donald Trump administration policy. Now, did Biden file that because he's our boy blue and wants to make this something that can immediately be contested? This is a fast track to a showdown in the courts. Is this part of a Mark Elias lawfare, Norm Eisen strategy to tie the Trump administration's hands on the enforcement of any of this, because it'll get held up in the courts? Maybe. It could be coming from either side. Regardless, I'll take it. I like stuff like this. This bothers people when there's a court challenge and then the court has a stay. That's okay. Let it rerun through. Let's get the ultimate decision. You don't have to get mad at this or that judge. We want the decisions from the highest possible place. Maybe there's some legitimacy at the Supreme Court. Let's find out. The fact that we're starting to see election fraud reporting might indicate maybe something's starting to simmer with that issue. But let's find out about the legitimacy of the courts. Let's challenge this 3-day-old Biden executive action, or I should say negotiation, this collective bargaining, as something that is obviously looking to tie the next president's hands. Such last-minute lame duck CBAs, which purport to bind a new president to his predecessor's policies, run counter to America's system of democratic self-government. CBAs quickly negotiated to include extreme policies on the eve of a new administration are purposefully designed to circumvent the will of the people and our democracy, little d, and not that our democracy that we hear about from the globalists. Such CBAs inhibit the president's authority to manage the executive branch by tying his hands with inefficient and ineffective practices. The Supreme Court has explained that a president cannot choose to bind his successors by diminishing their powers. So he's saying there's already Supreme Court precedent for this. Therefore, it is the policy of the executive branch that CBAs executed in the 30 days prior to the inauguration of a new president and that purport to remain in effect despite the inauguration of a new president and administration shall not be approved. Okay, so he's saying whatever was negotiated collectively between and the public sector unions doesn't count. Sorry, none of this is going to bind our government. And that's the only way it could ever possibly be. Now, there shouldn't be public sector unions. Public sector unions, whether they're at the federal level or at the state level, however much they might get decent health care for their employees. And I get that that's an important thing, although that model is going to change too. So it'll be a less important thing. But no matter how many of those things they purport to have won for the employees, what they're really doing is implementing an agenda and making employees dependent for even more dependent on the government. It is the government negotiating against itself to push their agenda. And as with all unions, in my opinion, at this point, it's hard to see them any other way. It seems as though they represent the ownership and advertise to the people they're purported to represent the agenda of the ownership, which would in this case be the government. And that's how it's gone. So Trump is invalidating the agreements that were struck by the fake president, Joe Biden. And as we discussed on Saturday night, it seems as though, so last week we didn't talk at length about the funding freeze or the memo that went out to federal employees offering for them to resign and cease work and still get paid for 8 more months till September, the end of the fiscal year. That's a very interesting policy that'll probably cause a lot of people who are highly motivated to join the public sector and just get into a different line of work to get out there and hit the ground running right now, while knowing that they are financially sound for the next 8 months, courtesy of the federal government. But the unions are trying to talk the federal employees into staying in their jobs, because if they don't do that, then the union doesn't really have any leverage against the Trump administration anymore. And so we were taking a look at this article from CNN, federal employees confused and angered by Trump's offer to quit. This is from Saturday, February 1st. Across the United States, multiple federal workers who spoke with CNN said they weren't willing to sacrifice benefits beyond their salaries, including health and retirement benefits and student loan forgiveness, not to mention careers. They requested their names not be used for fear of retaliation. So they build up the idea that these workers are really scared about how their life is going to go. Federal workers' unions quickly lashed out at the deferred resignation offer, stressing that it was not a buyout and that the administration might not be able to follow through on it. Employees should not take the program at face value. The Federation of Government Employees, the American Federation, quote unquote American, the largest federal workforce union, told members about the offer in an FAQ on Wednesday, a frequently asked questions document. The communications from the Office of Personnel Management are, quote, riddled with inconsistencies and uncertainties. It is also unclear whether OPM has the legal authority to support the program or its alleged benefits, and the eligibility criteria are vague. So they are telling their employees flat out, the federal government actually might not be able to do this for you. The union warned that the offer contains no guarantees that employees whose resignations are accepted will receive the benefits that the program purports to offer, and noted that the federal government is only funded through mid-March, so the Trump administration cannot make payment promises beyond then until Congress passes a spending bill. So they're worried that the government might get shut down, and all these people who accepted that they would resign and have this money to live on, well, they're going to be screwed. That's very unfortunate if that happens, but that's kind of the state that everybody exists in all the time. If something bad happens and you're on vacation or enjoying your 8 months of not working, you don't really have the option to just say, oh, come on, you can't do that. But that's what they're attempting to do. So, if the government shuts down and the deals don't work out, I guess, sorry, but a few good months is still something, and maybe more than people might otherwise deserve, because a lot of people, as Trump noted last week, are working second jobs and just getting paid to do their government job, though they do nothing. They don't go to work. They don't even actually produce anything verifiable. The backlash prompted the Trump administration to send another email to employees on Friday, this time coming from their individual agencies. It reinforced and underlined text that the offer is valid, lawful, and will be honored by the respective departments. Also, those who accept the offer will, quote, not be subject to a reduction in force or other premature separation, end quote, will not be expected to work during the roughly 8-month period with rare exceptions, and can take a non-governmental job during that time. And so they're making it very clear, yes, the offer is a good offer and a real offer, but we are going to live up to that offer. And the unions are telling their employees that, no, you actually can't depend on your employer, the federal government, to live up to the offer of paying you to not work, but you can definitely expect your employer, the federal government, to live up to their promise to pay you if you keep your job, even though you would then be totally subject to firing at any point. And they know that, and that's kind of the subtle subtext of the federal government's response. You're not going to lose your money if you take the resignation. If you refuse to take the resignation, then all bets are off. And of course, that's how it should be. The unions, though, are obviously not looking out for their employees. Okay. In one scenario, they're definitely going to get that money for 8 months, and they have to find something else to do with their lives. But they're definitely going to get that money for 8 months, and everything's going to be good. The union tells them the opposite thing, promising that they can somehow dictate what the federal government is going to do, despite the federal government telling them we're going to do this by the guy who says what he's going to do and does what he says what he's going to do. Apologies. So the union is working in clear opposition to the people it's ostensibly protecting, and it's ostensibly protecting these people right now. It's doing what it's doing because it's trying to protect itself. Because if the employees are gone, then there's no point in having the union, is there? And the union, of course, gets paid also by the federal government. So consider how cushy all of those union jobs are. They're doing important work protecting all these employees. Federal government has millions of employees, and these nice union people are protecting them. And it's a protection racket because, of course, those employees are forced to pay union dues. It really is crazy. And, of course, because they know who their employer is and they know who's protecting them, the unions then also have an easy time of making all of these people loudly and proudly, quote unquote, vote for uniparty, regime-oriented candidates up and down the ballot. And so the federal government remains in place. It is just a cycle. Each bit, it is a government human centipede. Don't look it up. Don't look it up. I promise, I'm telling you, don't look it up. And while we're on themes like that, tomorrow evening oh wow, there's a troll alert in the chat. Tomorrow evening, Burning Bright and I will be discussing the movie The Master, directed by Paul Thomas Anderson. It's a very interesting movie. It's also quite debauched, far more so than I remember. So if you are signing up to watch that, be warned in advance and understand that a part of me apologizes. It's not like a major apology or anything, but a part of me apologizes. I didn't mean to do that. I don't think anybody will be scarred beyond repair, but I didn't mean to do it. And that's sometimes what's important. So public sector unions might themselves end up being challenged or at least exposed. And if the federal government begins to disappear en masse, and there are not all of these federal workers who receive federal paychecks. Now, of course, the Treasury's paying those paychecks. Elon Musk and Doge now have access to all of that information, who the federal government is paying. What happens when we find out, and I do think we will find this out, and I wonder if it's how we find out this aspect of our elections. I wonder how many dead people or made up people are being paid by the federal government. Got to think there's a lot. Thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. It's going to be interesting. Just think of how easily they could funnel money through, just laundering the federal government's money over and over and over again by sending it out to this mass of federal employees that don't ever show up to work. So no one can tell if they have any fellow employees. I mean, what happens if the Treasury believes that an agency is 200 people and there are 190 fake people in that agency, but no one ever has to go to an office, and they just figure, oh, these are the only people in the company I actually know. Everybody else is just an AI. I'm getting into some speculation, obviously, here, but we have seen things that are along those lines. And at this point, I can imagine that they are laundering money and increasing the population by whatever means they can access. If you can do something and you are them, why wouldn't you do it in all the places you can do it? They have these processes. The goals don't change throughout the regime. They don't believe they're ever going to get caught because they're in control of everything. The only times they do get caught are when they're trying to take down the organization, when the regime itself is trying to take down the organization or the individual for his corruption and compromise. So you can pretty much get away with anything under those circumstances. Moving on, Miranda Devine wrote in the New York Post about Trump cleaning out the FBI and the DOJ, going through all of the various scandals and controversies the FBI and the DOJ have been involved with over the last few years. The regime freaking out about that. The response, you may or may not be seeing this in your social media feeds, but the response to a lot of the adjustments, let's say, that the Trump administration has made to the status of federal employees and federal agencies, a lot of that response has ended up on Reddit. And there are these message boards where federal employees are just anonymously voicing their concerns. And hey, cheers to anonymous communications. Can't be mad at it. I think maybe a lot of people have, a desire to figure out who these people are and bust them in real time. But hey, information among other information. I want to know what they know. So this is on the r/FBI board. OPSEC reminder, use of fingerprinting on emails and notices. The Post says, please share. We've received word that Elon Musk's staffers are using space characters to identify information leakers. Before sharing any information, please use a checker to detect and remove these. Avoid directly leaking images. Instead, request that the information be rewritten and the image recreated rather than shared directly from the source. This is essentially an email watermark, adding a space here, making a typo there, and similar subtle changes to track leaks. Stay vigilant. So the idea here is that there are attempts to bust these people for leaking information. And the way that they'll do it is they'll put some identifier in the text of the email that makes it so they can know who received that particular version of that text. Okay, so maybe there's an extra space between sentences somewhere in the email, and that version is sent to 1 or 2 or 10 people. I don't know how they're doing it. But if the leaked email had that 2-space anomaly, well, then you'd know that email came from this person or these people. So they are actively, there's like, again, and we're going to see some of this on Hindsight 2017 tonight, but there is once again an active effort within the federal government to directly subvert the changes being made by the president, who again is the plenary authority of the executive branch. The president, what he says for the executive branch, that's what goes. That's how the Constitution intended things to be. And again, if they have a problem with this, perhaps they should strip the size of government down to the way the Constitution intended it would be, which gives the president far less authority. And then he wouldn't be able to weigh in on what the agencies were doing, because there wouldn't be any agencies. And again, to reiterate the point, it's possible that the federal agencies might just move outside of the federal government, and rather than being controlled by the executive branch or a Donald Trump or anything in the US government, they would then be quote unquote private organizations, totally unaccountable to anyone. And then the people would actually have to tell their governors or whatever state agencies, hey, we're actually not okay with this. And so this process, as we're going through it with Donald Trump, it's going to have to be repeated at the state level, probably, because Donald Trump can reduce the power of the federal government, but the extent to which he's going to be able to do stuff in states is going to be questionable. And that's going to be an issue to be adjudicated in the future. But these organizations moving outside the federal government is probably going to be a way of the future. And they'll have levels of control where Donald Trump's not going to be able to say, you can't do this, you can't do this. If the WHO or the CDC is outside of the federal government, they're not going to have anyone contesting the information they put out. And if states are going to go along with it because they're the expert agencies, trust the science, I guess we'll see. And again, you got to be game for that too. The red states and the blue states, are they going to have different policies? Are we going to see a lot of red states go along with the blue states? Maybe the difference there, maybe people will actually start paying attention to that in ways that they didn't in 2020, when some states weren't going along with any of it and others were doing whatever the CDC and the WHO and the FDA and the rest of it would say. Hey, everybody, very safe, very effective. Now, On Morning Joe this morning, Morning Joe and Morning Mika hosted Rahm Emanuel. Rahm Emanuel was Barack Obama's chief of staff. He was the fake president Joe Biden's ambassador to Japan. And he has two brothers, Ezekiel. Ezekiel was on Joe Biden's COVID panel and said that people should die at age 75 because that's when they basically become totally useless eaters, even more useless than they are now. They're only a drain on society. They've lived long enough. Give someone else a chance. So that's Ezekiel Emanuel. And then there's Ari Emanuel, who the character from Entourage, Ari Gold, was modeled after. Ari Emanuel owns the William Morris Endeavor talent agency. On their roster of talent is included most of the television characters throughout the mainstream media and the alternative mainstream media, as well as, of course, part of the Trump and Friends super team Power Rangers, Dana White. But this is Rahm Emanuel in the midst of a bit of a meltdown over Trump eliminating corrupt members of the FBI and DOJ.
I mean, this is not a pop quiz, Joe, question, because we actually have a test case of this. Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu will be in the Oval Office tomorrow, and he tried exactly this strategy of going after the Justice Department in Israel, going after the Shin Bet, the FBI equivalent, and it ended up with October 7th, the worst killing of Jews since the Holocaust and World War II.
What? Our Boy Yoo-hoo is coming to meet with Donald Trump tomorrow. And Rahm Emanuel, by the way, their father was in the Zionist paramilitary group Irgun. So look them up. Netanyahu, Our Boy Yoo-hoo, and by that I mean he's totally under control, and that should be totally obvious and has been for a long time. He is coming to visit Donald Trump tomorrow. And Rahm Emanuel is saying that it was Netanyahu's efforts to go after the Israeli FBI, the Shin Bet, the way Trump is going after the FBI, that caused the paragliding go-kart incident. That is amazing. Is that a threat of terrorism from the man whose dad was in a terrorist organization? I know he's a very prominent member of society, and I know Israel is our closest ally and all, but that sounded like the threat of terrorism because we were told that was Hamas. But also, there had already been an effort for over a year, well over a year, to get rid of Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel using all the same tactics that they've used to get rid of Donald Trump, including color revolutions. And so they knew for a year that the paragliding go-karts were going to attack over the most secure border in the history of the world, and it still happened anyway. And then it was blamed on Benjamin Netanyahu. But Rahm Emanuel's right here saying that all of that happened in response to Netanyahu going after the Shin Bet in the same way that Donald Trump is going after the FBI. What? Because the people going after Donald Trump right now for going after the FBI, well, it's everybody in the uniparty. Like, it's our elites. What's happening here? Are our elites and the members of the uniparty the ones doing all the terrible things to us this whole time? And they're telling us, oh, it's terrorists. What is Rahm Emanuel saying? Listen to this again. It's incredible. This is one of the most amazing things I've ever heard. And if you want to see the whole clip, Carly Bonet clipped it and put it up in her Telegram today. I'll make sure it's in mine as well. I'm not taking him out of context.
This is not a pop quiz, Joe, question, because we actually have a test case of this. Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu will be in the Oval Office tomorrow, and he tried exactly this strategy of going after the Justice Department in Israel, going after the Shin Bet, the FBI equivalent, and it ended up with October 7th, the worst killing of Jews since the Holocaust and World War II.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what he said. That is definitely what Rahm Emanuel, the former Obama chief of staff, just said. And by the way, speaking of Dana White, one of the UFC fighters, is apparently part of the pro-Hitler op. And then Dana White had to come out and renounce him. Again, the UFC is owned by that guy's brother. Okay. Now, Bryce Mitchell may well be totally sincere in his beliefs. I would suggest that he may be susceptible to the pro-Nazi op online and be playing right into the hands of people like that guy right there, Rahm Emanuel. Rose Thistle in the chat says Netanyahu was also clearing out leftist nonsense from the court system. There were tiny protests and his own backstabbers in his own government whining about that. Then 10/7 happened. And that's exactly right. The regime in their proxy state, Israel, was attempting to further empower the Supreme Court so that they could override Our Boy Yoo-hoo. And I don't know if Our Boy Yoo-hoo has been replaced, or maybe he was a double agent the whole time. I am not speaking to his goodness in the past, okay? Although it's also worth remembering that in a few years, you could look back at news from 2015 and in 2028, you'll be able to look back at news from 13 years ago about how awful Donald Trump is. And there's not one of us that is going to agree with that 4 years from now. But we'll be able to find 13-year-old news, which seems like it's got to be part of history by now, that says Donald Trump is the worst person ever. Okay, so we have to look at some of that Our Boy Yoo-hoo history, first of all, through good twin, evil twin, and not just Israel is bad or that Israel is a global proxy state. Hey, friends, the United States of America is a global proxy state. It's not right now, thank goodness, but it has been at various points. So I'm not trying to deny any of the history. I don't know the history. I know that the news is fake and that Our Boy Yoo-hoo is playing the game right now. And Donald Trump showed the entire world that with that weird overhand, extra hand on the hand handshake a few months back when Our Boy Yoo-hoo visited Mar-a-Lago, the Winter White House, where the king of the world lives. So we're going to hear from the pro-Hitler op about how Donald Trump is a Zionist stooge from tomorrow through probably the rest of the week. And then there are going to be obvious freakouts. We're leading up to the Super Bowl, by the way, on Sunday. The federal government, you have to resign now thing comes on Thursday, or is it Friday? 3rd, 4th, 5th. I'm doing it in my head. Thursday, the 6th. So the federal government thing, that's going to be a meltdown. All of this is going to be ongoing and continual. It's just going to increase and escalate the whole time. And then Sunday's the Super Bowl. So they're going to have a get everyone back on the same page event this weekend. They just tried it yesterday with the Grammys, utter clown show, done for attention. Kanye and his wife, weird, or girlfriend or whatever she is, weird. Also, he's hilarious. I imagine there are going to be a lot of distractions this week, but tomorrow and Wednesday, we're going to be hearing Trump is a Zionist shill from the pro-Hitler app. And from their controlled opposition on the other side, it's going to be Israel is evil and Trump is evil for working with Israel. They're going to get all the sides represented. And the Uniparty will have their special pro-Israel side that says it's good that Trump and Netanyahu are doing XYZ, but also the war needs to continue for much longer because, of course, those are the neocons. And the neocons are ultimately the people operating the pro-Hitler op, as they would have been 80 years ago, 90 years ago. Okay. So let's move on from the FBI. But man, oh man, Rahm Emanuel is kind of just, what do they call that in Normieville? Saying the quiet part out loud. Is that what it is? I think that's what it is. That's what Rahm Emanuel is doing right there. And you got to love it when they're straightforward about it. Is there going to be a paragliding go-kart incident here in the United States of America? Well, not now that we have a narrative Iron Dome, thank goodness. I mean, it didn't work in Israel, but it does stop missiles. Doesn't stop paragliding go-karts. No one can stop those. It's impossible. It's impossible to stop paragliding go-karts. Okay, so let's see what happened to the global revolution arm of the CIA. Politico, USAID building closed as agency's future in doubt. So this is from this morning. Staffers at the U.S. Agency for International Development were told the agency's main building in Washington was closed on Monday and they should work from home. The email came early Monday morning, soon after tech mogul and President Donald Trump ally, strange way to say that, Elon Musk, said he had spoken to the president, who agreed to close down the agency. Who agreed? Yes, Elon gives him recommendations and Trump says, yes, do it. As if none of this is planned. Elon's just going through with his 6 teenagers and they're like, President, you need to close down USAID. Have you ever heard of this agency before? Are you just like the people on X, formerly Twitter, who think that they're smarter than you? And he's like, oh yes, I'm just hearing of this right now, but you can go ahead. You teens, make sure not to get home too late after you close down USAID. Imagine Trump just needed Elon to tell him that USAID is no good. He hasn't figured it out at any point in the last, 9 years he's been doing this now? 9 years he had no idea as president and the best information on earth with advisors aplenty all the time because he's president and king of the world and a huge billionaire who has world leaders visiting his castle. But yes, Elon Musk and Doge figured it out. Just like Elon bought Twitter. It's insulting. At some point, people should be insulted by the news they receive. With regard to the USAID stuff, I went over it with him in detail, and he agreed that we should shut it down. Musk said in a live X Spaces early Monday morning. We spent the weekend feeding USAID into the wood chipper, Musk wrote. Well, good. That's where it should be. We don't need the CIA overthrowing world governments paid for by American taxpayers. It is insane where we have gotten ourselves. Let's go back to the article in the Federalist. We'll jump around to a few things. Got lots of USAID stuff. It's been such a big subject. And it's not something that we've talked a lot about. It's something that if you follow Mike Benz, you'll have been hearing about all of this for years. And if you do a lot of digs like many truthers do, you will end up hitting USAID over and over again. So a lot of people have been familiar with it. Now it is just going out en masse to everyone, which is awesome. So this article, as I said, compiled a lot of different sources. Breaking: USAID senior officials put on leave after physically trying to stop Doge from accessing systems. They were put on leave Saturday night after refusing to allow Doge members access to USAID systems. The members threatened to physically call the police. I guess that's what we do, physically call the police. I don't know any other way to do it. After being refused entry. So the Doge members were going to call the police on these security officials at USAID, kind of big upping them. They were trying to access the security and personnel files. Federal officials are concerned that Trump is trying to fold USAID into the State Department in an effort to cut government corruption and bloat. And yes, he is. And yes, he did. USAID employs approximately 10,000 people, excluding contractors, with 2/3 of them overseas. Isn't that strange? 60 USAID members were already put on leave last week after trying to circumvent President Trump's executive order on stopping foreign aid. So they were still pushing out U.S. taxpayer money to their foreign partners because those foreign partners are key aspects to regime overthrow operations, color revolutions, etc. Federal officials are concerned. Why would federal officials be concerned that Trump is trying to fold USAID into the U.S. State Department? And of course, that did not work. Senator Jeff Merkley over the weekend said a president is not a king. Trump cannot eliminate USAID with a stroke of a pen. Not only is it illegal, it is a gift to our adversaries. Phil Kerpen points out that the USAID was created by executive order. Donald Trump actually addressed that particular aspect today in his executive order signing / press conference. Let's go there right now. This is also on my Truth Social today. You can find that on Truth Social by searching "I'm Your Moderator," as you can at all of these. So this is what Trump says in response to whether or not it will take an act of Congress to get rid of USAID or to bring them back under the State Department.
Will it take an act of Congress to do away with USAID, or people that you have?
I don't know. I don't think so. No, not when it comes to fraud. If there's fraud, these people are lunatics. And if it comes to fraud, you wouldn't have an act of Congress. And I'm not sure that you would anyway. But we just want to do the right thing. But it's something that should have been done a long time ago. It went crazy during the Biden administration. They went totally crazy what they were doing, and the money they were giving to people that shouldn't be getting it, and to agencies and others that shouldn't be getting it. Was a shame. So they're tremendous fraud. But we'll be doing a report. We'll be giving you that report at the appropriate time. Yeah, I love the concept of it. Yeah, sure. I love the concept, but they turn out to be radical left lunatics. And the concept of it is good, but it's all about the people.
It's all about the people. And unfortunately, the people are global communists and neoconservatives. And USAID has just been an organization that overthrows governments, including our own. People do not like to think about such things, but think about them we must. Let's go back to the Federalist. And again, Donald Trump is the plenary authority of the executive branch. If he does not have purview over USAID, who does? It's not part of the legislative branch. It's not part of the judicial branch. So it's either part of the executive branch or it's not part of the government at all. And if it's not part of the government at all, what would that mean about all that money they've spent? This is another one of those examples I think that we're going to run into, where we will discuss in the future the concept of odious debt. None of us signed up for any of that, and none of us owe it. That is all them. And of course, it's their money. So one thing we definitely don't have to do is repay it. Let's go back to the Federalist. This tweet was in response to the one above. USAID is a criminal organization, says Elon Musk. Time for it to die. Mike Benz responds, USAID grantee NGOs literally take their USAID money, then turn around and lobby all key members of Congress to give more and more U.S. taxpayer money to USAID each year in the budget. USAID buys an army of lobbyists with your tax dollars to give it more of your money. Now, speaking of that, let's check in with some of those members of Congress. This is, I believe, a member of USAID in the first part of this clip, and then it's Senator Chris Van Hollen, supposed senator. I always put senator in quotes now because you don't know how these people are elected, nor if they are elected. And it's starting to seem a little ridiculous to just call them senators as though they are real senators. Chris Van Hollen.
Stopping this will require action by the courts and for Republicans to show up and show courage and stand up.
By the way, that voice sounds like Mr. Garrison from South Park. This guy's voice is incredible. This clip's a couple minutes long.
For our country. Further, I'm urging my fellow Democrats to use every legislative tool we have at our disposal to slow down and stop this crime from succeeding. We're here to shine a light on this. You see the wonderful people in here with us. Let me give you my good friend, Senator Chris Van Hollen.
Thank you, Don. Well, thank you. Thank you to Don Beyer and all of our colleagues gathered here and all of you who are here at this moment of a clear and present danger for the future of our country. Make no mistake, this effort by Elon Musk and so-called Doge to shut down the Agency for International Development is an absolute gift to our adversaries, to Russia, to China, to Iran and others, because AID is an essential instrument of U.S. foreign policy and U.S. national security policy. So this has nothing to do with making the U.S. government more efficient and everything to do with aiding and abetting our adversaries around the world. If you doubt that for a moment, listen to what the former president and Putin crony Medvedev just put out on X. Quote, smart move by Elon Musk, referring to shutting down AID, former Russian president and stooge of Vladimir Putin. This is also a huge gift to the PRC. And it's interesting that Vivek Ramaswamy, who was originally the Elon Musk co-pilot on Doge, is no longer here. But here's what he said just a year or so ago. Quote, Tesla is increasingly beholden to China. I have no reason to think that Elon won't jump like a circus monkey when Xi Jinping calls in the hour of need, unquote. He went on to refer to Musk as a Chinese puppet and then posted on X that the U.S. needs leaders who aren't in China's pocket. This is Vivek Ramaswamy, who had been originally, as you know, one of the co-chairs at this so-called Doge. The recently installed Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, had this to say.
I think he means recently confirmed by that Senate, Marco Rubio. Their legitimacy, as I have said, is questionable at best. You got to love how he says installed. So Elon Musk is a servant of China. That is what we are supposed to believe. And it's because of his service to China that he wants to shut down the organization that's a CIA cutout that whose purpose and intent is explicitly to implement the global regime's agenda worldwide through color revolutions and, as we'll see, censorship, funding of propaganda. It just goes on and on and on. And we're supposed to believe that China, Russia, Korea, Iran, these are our real enemies? Not the people who censored us and overthrew our government and stole our election and run the lawfare. Not those people at all. And we'll probably end up hitting this again later, but Samantha Power, the administrator of USAID, and Norm Eisen, the author of the Color Revolution Playbook worldwide, are pals. They're in organizations together, pursuing the exact same agenda. They're two parts of the same process to overthrow governments. Really is incredible. We also have this from Ilhan Omar, making it clear that the Congress and Senate really are not on the same level that the president's on in terms of their loyalties. It's a very, very strange thing to watch. Well, just a moment for processing. I go to my notes, and that senator's name is Van Hollen, and it keeps looking like Van Halen in my notes. And I'm like, whoa, Van Halen. And I apparently can't stop myself from doing it 3 times now. Here we are. Ilhan Omar.
Do you want the executive making the only decisions in this country, or do you want the elected representatives that you sent to Washington making those policies? I am exceptionally upset about USAID. I lived in a refugee camp for 4 years as a child surviving civil war. It is the essential programs that USAID provided that kept my family and I fed and safe. It is the resources that so many people around the world rely on. And it is our soft power. Oftentimes, people interact with our country through the military. That does not create love for us, and it certainly does not keep us safe. When the world interacts with Americans through programs that provide essential need, they get to see the heart and compassion of the American people.
So that's what all the money's for. You got to show those peoples our passion, our compassion, and our heart. And then they will want to be part of our democracy. And that's what USAID does. That's why it's so important. You don't even know it's happening. That's the best part. We just sign bills, and then all the money goes bye-bye. And with it, we launder it to government organizations, non-governmental organizations, I should say, around the world and other governments, and take over countries through color revolutions. It really is amazing. And so programs like this, or maybe even this program, saved Ilhan Omar and her family when she was a child. Does that have anything to do with her political position now? Gotta wonder. She's from Minnesota. Minneapolis has that was the location for Somalians in the slave trade, or the refugee trade, I should say. Totally. That have built that Somalian community in Minneapolis. And Ilhan Omar, of course, is the person who runs that community for the political benefit of the Uniparty in the United States. They're defending the CIA's ability to take over other countries on behalf of the global regime. And Somalia, by the way, it's worth mentioning, Donald Trump over the weekend announced on Truth Social, and then posted video of it to, I guess, make it more real. Huge explosion, like top, I don't know, there were a lot of explosions last week. Top 6 or 7 explosions of last week was Donald Trump's explosion in Somalia. Apparently they took out ISIS in Somalia, or maybe they just took out Ilhan Omar. She sounds panicked, so it could be either. And did I just suggest that maybe it might be code language? Yeah, it might be. Hold for processing. Here we are, X, formerly Twitter. Elon Musk notes this morning, USAID and other government agencies are funding media groups around the world. How about that? The BBC in particular. So the regime, this is like the British Royal State propaganda media. So the regime of the regime and USAID was giving them money because, of course, USAID is involved with propagandizing the world. This is courtesy of Mike Benz. They are also involved in censoring the world. And this clip's about 3 minutes.
Disinformation has invaded online conversations on social media platforms, posing challenges to healthy information environments and threats to democracy. It bolsters authoritarians, weakens democratic voices and participation, exploits and exacerbates existing social cleavages, and silences opposition. Countering disinformation and promoting information integrity are necessary priorities for ensuring democracy can thrive. The CEP's Countering Disinformation Guide is a resource including 9 thematic sections and a comprehensive database of interventions highlighting various approaches for advancing information integrity and strengthening societal resilience to disinformation and other harmful online campaigns. The International Foundation for Electoral Systems, International Republican Institute, and National Democratic Institute developed this guide with support from USAID through the Consortium for Elections and Political Process Strengthening. Here are 9 key takeaways from the guide. Addressing disinformation requires a whole-of-society approach. We need to create a sense of urgency to drive collective action for addressing disinformation. Institutions and platforms have the resources to address disinformation, but lack credibility, whereas civil society has the credibility, but is chronically under-resourced. Countering disinformation requires a mixed methods approach, including fact-checking, monitoring, and other interventions. Focusing on major events like election outcomes alone will not achieve a healthy information environment. Developing norms and standards, legal and regulatory frameworks, and better social media content moderation is necessary for a healthy information ecosystem. It is important to establish frameworks to discourage political parties from engaging in disinformation. Not sure where to start? Click here to explore the Interventions database of organizations, projects, and donors working to counter disinformation around the world.
Man, that is pretty dystopian. What part of our government was doing that? They say that they're not part of the government. I guess we'll find out. No more color revolutions worldwide? That would be amazing. These are the exact things that they did to Americans. And maybe it's good. Maybe we had to see all this stuff. Maybe we had to know this is what our government is doing in our name around the world and has been doing for our entire lifetimes. Now we see them do it to us. I was censored. Many of you were censored. That's a direct violation, according to these people. In every other case, if it was ever their people, whenever it is one of the leaders that they will describe as some kind of totalitarian or dictator, the brutal leaders of these other countries, Maduro, for instance, if he were to shut down a regime journalist, that would be a grave violation of human rights and free speech. But when they censor us here in America in direct violation to the First Amendment, in conjunction with the state and state organizations obviously directing this, they're protecting democracy. Maybe we just have to see them do it to us. Hopefully we have fully learned our lesson. Also wanted to share this one from Chief Nerd today on X, formerly Twitter. Let me get this straight, he says. Fauci's NIAID and USAID sent over $40 million in U.S. taxpayer support to a scientist in Wuhan who was working on bat coronavirus emergence research, who also became patient zero for COVID-19. And the completion date for that funding was in 2019. This document was obtained via FOIA by White Coat Waste. Now, the interesting thing is that it starts in 2014. Some of these dates, oh, that's going to pop out. I'm not going to be able to highlight it. But One of the programs, $38 million, October 1st, 2014 through September of 2019. So just basically that fiscal year. And there were other instances of that in 2014 as well. And so the idea here is COVID research, these biomedical research laboratories, we're going to hear about Ukraine as well, of course, being funded by USAID. Now, does that mean that they created the coronavirus that leaked from the lab and gain of function and all the rest of it? No, that's not what it means. But the program was definitely going, as far as these records show. Doesn't prove that. What the program says it was doing was actually what it was doing. There are programs that pay for all sorts of fakery in our society. NASA's a program. NASA has accountants that clock hours for various people. Some of them are doing academic work. Some of them are figuring out how to run psyops. It would be nice if it was a different way. It just isn't. But hey, man, the moon landing was friggin' awesome. Shower rods and tin foil just shunted out into space. Fly, little guy, you can make it. Driving a go-kart around on the moon. Rad. Alexander Dugin, the Russian philosopher and political philosopher, kind of like, I think of him as like Putin's Steve Bannon. I don't know if this is going to be an exercise in futility to go through this because he's speaking in Russian and then it's subtitled and I can read the subtitles. I guess it's possible that I might be able to make this quiet enough that I can do it. We're going to give it, just going to give it a shot. We're halfway there. Whoa, living on a prayer. Let's see if I can properly read over Dugin's speech. And if I can, I'll just summarize what he's saying. What has this organization been doing up until today, he says, talking about USAID. It has bankrolled, organized, and supported color revolutions across all countries, took part in regime changes, funded political protests, as well as political assassinations and terrorist attacks. The most surprising thing is that this organization, which has freely operated in the U.S., oh, now his voice is totally gone. Regardless of the change in administration, is now being dismantled by Trump himself. In addition, Elon Musk has gone even further. This, by the way, is his achievement. The Organized Commission for Government Efficiency, called DOGE, which is led by Elon Musk, is conducting an audit of government performance. Okay, so you get the gist there, and I won't keep going through that kind of grading process. I hope that wasn't too awful to listen to. Putin's guy, this would be like Steve Bannon saying on War Room, and I didn't watch War Room today, but Steve Bannon might have said it, probably did say it, that this organization is involved in running color revolutions around the world. And so from the perspective of sovereign nations, of course they would want to see an end put to an organization like this. They are directly responsible for all of the chaos in these small nations that just want to be sovereign nations and not aligned with that global regime agenda. Imagine what that must be like to be a small sovereign nation that knows, we in the United States have the advantage, or at least perceived advantage, of believing that we have the world's most powerful military that can, and we are a country that can defend itself from whatever we must defend ourselves from. And the Second Amendment, of course, goes along with that, thank goodness. But imagine being a small state or a powerful nation, quote unquote, like Australia, that doesn't have the right to own a gun, knowing that you could be taken over. And knowing that there was an organization funded and run by the most powerful nations collectively that was operating in your country and you couldn't stop them for the benefit of that global regime. And they would rush so much money into your country that all of the talented, competent, and capable people, in order to just provide nice lives for themselves and their families, would happily go along with the global regime's cause and work in their organizations. And again, that's one of those things that we kind of have to reflect on here in this country and think about how much it is we do to contribute to the implementation of that agenda or the success of the organizations who implement that agenda here in America. But I can only imagine what that would look like from one of these small states. It's infuriating to me watching them operate against us here. At least we have Donald Trump as our champion. We have the Second Amendment. We have kind of the American mythology motivating us and the drive to preserve what we believe to be our birthright, whether or not the people who have had control of us throughout our lives consider any of that our birthright. But there we have Alexander Dugin just calling it out right away. Let us continue. Worth mentioning, although not going deeply into, some of the international news organizations are reporting on the ties between George Soros and these color revolution organizations, always working in conjunction with USAID. George Soros has been funding and directing color revolutions worldwide since the 1980s. So nothing new there. But this is the organization that's all tied in. Like when you hear Soros, it's USAID doing all of this around the world. They call it international development. It's really amazing. As I said earlier, Marco Rubio is becoming the acting administrator of USAID. This is ABC News.
President Trump there taking questions after
Wow.
signing more executive orders in the
is
Oval, while also talking water, aid to
more
Gaza,
annoying than
tariffs.
when these-
But we do have some fact checking to do. Let's get straight to White House correspondent Mary Alice Parks.
Hold, please. ABC has one of those pages that just updates with new stories, and some video plays automatically above. Oh, now we are totally screwed. Okay, thanks, ABC News. That article has been lost completely somewhere in that feed. The link was correct. It's just not correct anymore. Let's go to some Marco Rubio video. We'll skip the ABC News article. We don't need it. We don't need it at all. So Marco Rubio did a little impromptu press conference today.
Yeah, there are things that USAID, that we do through USAID, that we should continue to do, and we will continue to do. But everything they do has to be in alignment with the national interest and the foreign policy of the United States. And the attitude that USAID has adopted over the years is, no, we are independent of the national interest. We fund programs irrespective of whether it's aligned or not aligned with the foreign policy. That's ridiculous.
USAID believes that it is, quote unquote, independent. And it also believes that it doesn't have to do things that are aligned with America's best interests. And it's also the CIA. It's essentially the CIA as an executive branch, quasi-executive branch. Apparently, they think it's somehow outside the executive branch, and maybe it is, that funds international development, the takeover and overthrow of other countries across the world. It believes it's outside the executive branch, and it can do things that are in direct opposition to the interests of the American people. That is a foreign occupation, essentially. They operate on behalf of the global regime right here in America using American resources and the credential of having the stamp of approval from the American government. And they overthrow countries around the world. Let's keep going with Rubio.
These are taxpayer dollars. Every penny that we spend in foreign aid needs to be in furtherance and aligned with the national interest and the foreign policy of the United States. So this is not about ending the programs that USAID does per se. There are things that it does that are good, and there are things that it does that we have strong questions about. It's about the way it operates as an entity. And they're supposed to take direction from the State Department, policy direction. They do not. Not only do they not take policy direction, they're completely uncooperative. When you ask questions, when you try to go in and find out, okay, what does this program do? Who's getting the money? Why was this funded? Why are we doing this? Why aren't you coordinating with the embassy or the State Department? Their attitude is, we don't have to answer to you because we are independent. We answer to no one. Well, that's not true, and that will
That was Secretary.
There's Kayleigh McEnany, old milquetoast herself. So Marco Rubio was on the Senate Intelligence Committee, and now he's the Secretary of State. And he's talking about how not only will USAID do things in opposition to the interests of the American people, they don't believe that they are accountable to the president. And if you go even in a position like Marco Rubio's, multiple positions, if you go to them for information, they feel no need whatsoever to give it to members of the government who would have oversight or authority over them. Totally unaccountable. We are getting all the way down to the bottom of the deep state. This seems to be somewhere close to the bottom. Actually, let me see if I can find this amazing tweet from Bill Kristol yesterday. And if I can't, then I will obviously don't. So Bill Kristol yesterday, I'm going to summarize. It was a very short message on X, formerly Twitter. He said he would rather have the deep state than the Trump state. They're basically just coming out with it at this point. And sometimes I'm like, okay, this has to just be some kind of op, or maybe they're trying to fool us, or maybe this is part of the hoodwinking. And then it's like, well, if they were at an existential crisis, and they are, how would you act? You would try to just openly defend your organization. It's not hidden anymore. And so that's going to really bother people that you hid it for so long, because you hide things from people because you don't want them to know those things. Because if they know those things, well, then your thing might get messed up. So you've hidden it for all this time. Well, now people know about it. Okay, well, we better tell them why it's so good at least. You're on your last legs. What else are you going to do? It's a tough one. It's a tough one. Amazing clip, though. And it's incredible that anything in our government operates that way. And again, in our government is the key understanding here. Is it in our government? Is this organization going to continue just operating color revolutions around the world just without the benefit of U.S. backing? And have they been over the last 4 years? I would say yes. Have any of them been successful? Not sure that they have. And the regime has been kicked out of country after country after country around the world. We're going to talk about Myanmar tonight. What French nation was it? Or what French colony? It was Senegal. Just today, kicked out the French. Another African nation kicking out the European colonists. Whether it's just being reported now or what. Did Trump wrap this up and separate things in the first term? I guess we're going to see. They've still been assigning their money all over. Now it's all going to be tracked by Elon Musk. Really interesting stuff. Another little bit here from Rubio. This is a couple more minutes, but this was his comments in this press conference were just really interesting.
Well, look, I mean, my frustration with USAID goes back to my time in Congress. It's a completely unresponsive agency. It's supposed to respond to policy directives of the State Department, and it refuses to do so. So the functions of USAID, there are a lot of functions of USAID that are going to continue, that are going to be part of American foreign policy, but it has to be aligned with American foreign policy. I said very clearly during my confirmation hearing that every dollar we spend and every program we fund, that will be aligned with the national interest of the United States. And USAID has a history of sort of ignoring that and deciding that there's somehow a global charity separate from the national interest. These are taxpayer dollars. And so I'm very troubled by these reports that they've been unwilling to cooperate with people who are asking simple questions about what does this program do, who gets the money, who are our contractors, who's funded. And that sort of level of insubordination makes it impossible to conduct the sort of mature and serious review that I think foreign aid writ large should have. We're spending taxpayer money here. These are not donor dollars. These are taxpayer dollars. And we owe the American people.
These are not donor dollars. These are taxpayer dollars. First off, taxpayer dollars are regime fiat dollars created from nothing that are then pinned to create their value to the sweat and blood of the American people. And obviously whichever slaves are imported into this country. So taxpayer dollars is always a bit of a weird way to think about it. Let's continue.
The assurances that every dollar we are spending.
Oh, this is what I was going to say. The donor dollars, though, those are the philanthropists and the rest of them. And they fund a lot of the agencies in government. And I think as we begin to see some of these kind of removed from government, we'll see the donor dollars continuing to flow to those agencies. I think pharma is going to keep sponsoring the CDC, for instance.
Abroad is being spent on something that furthers our national interest. And so far, a lot of the people that work at USAID have just simply refused to cooperate.
Are you currently in charge of USAID?
I'm the acting director of USAID. I've delegated that authority to someone, but I stay in touch with him. And again, our goal was to go in and align our foreign aid to the national interest. But if you go to mission after mission and embassy after embassy around the world, you will often find that in many cases, USAID is involved in programs that run counter to what we're trying to do in our national strategy with that country or with that region. That cannot continue. USAID is not an independent, non-governmental entity. It is an entity that spends taxpayer dollars, and it needs to spend it, as the statute says, in alignment with the policy directives that they get from the Secretary of State, the National Security Council, and the President. And it's been 20 or 30 years where people have tried to reform it, and it refuses to reform. It refuses to cooperate. When we were in Congress, we couldn't even get answers to basic questions about programs. That will not continue. That's not going to continue.
He's saying all the right things. He absolutely is. Now, again, I think that a lot of this stuff has probably been handled well before Marco Rubio showed up as the Secretary of State. And as far as this information being rolled out now, it feels a lot like the quote unquote Twitter files. Like this is when Elon's finally getting his hands on this prepackaged intelligence product that's being rolled out. Let's go back to that Federalist article one last time. Here is just some more stuff that USAID was involved with. Why did USAID pay $20 million to hit piece journalists to dig up dirt on Rudy Giuliani and use that dirt as the basis to impeach the sitting U.S. president in 2019? Well, that's a damn good question. USAID has funded organizations facilitating illegal migration into the U.S., foreign abortions, climate change hysteria, transgender ideology, international Marxism, and anti-white racism, according to a 2022 Heritage Foundation report. Robert Redfield testified before Congress that USAID helped fund the development of the COVID-19 virus. We just went over that a second ago. Take that as you will. The Inspector General report in 2018 found that USAID funding had fueled opium farming in Afghanistan, which funds terrorism, and which is why our military was in Afghanistan for 2 decades, guarding opium fields. It doesn't only fund terrorism, though. By the way, the cartels, terrorist organizations now. It also, I guess, funds pharma because if you're taking the product that's being farmed from USAID funding, it is amazing. It's amazing. Nayib Bukele gives us the perspective of a man running, or so the TV says, one of those small nations. Most governments don't want USAID funds flowing into their countries because they understand where much of that money actually ends up. While marketed as support for development, democracy, and human rights, the majority of these funds are funneled into opposition groups, NGOs with political agendas, and destabilizing movements. At best, maybe 10% of the money reaches real projects that help people in need. There are such cases. But the rest is used to fuel dissent, finance protests, and undermine administrations that refuse to align with the globalist agenda. Cutting this so-called aid isn't just beneficial for the United States, it's also a big win for the rest of the world. And again, you got to love it. People occasionally get the impression that I'm not happy with how progress overall is going. Donald Trump is doing everything he needs to do in exactly the right ways to return us back to the founders' original intent and to the American mythology that is the basis for the country we are promised to as our birthright. Donald Trump is doing all of that. I couldn't be happier with Donald Trump doing those things. It doesn't mean that I think every single thing he does, we should just take at face value as the thing he wants most in the world. But, oh yeah, it only applies to XYZ. The rest of the time, I can see that Donald Trump is speaking in code language. We've got to consider it all the ways at all times and understand that it's up to us to discern all these things at all times. Apologies. I was looking for the next link here because for real, at 2 hours and 20 minutes, we're about halfway through the list I made. This is the last thing on USAID for today. We are going to Senator, apparently, Brian Schatz of Hawaii. This dude is the most Hawaiian-looking guy you will ever see. This is from the Wall Street Journal today. There's Schatz. You can imagine the lei right around his neck. He's that Hawaiian looking. Democratic senator says he will stall Trump nominees until USAID is back. So speaking of the fantasy team that people think I don't support enough, now we have a built-in way for the regime to destroy itself further by thwarting the members of the fantasy team. And just yesterday, Lieutenant General Michael Flynn said that he was like putting out a warning on X, formerly Twitter, to anyone who might attempt to stall Donald Trump's nominees. Now we have a guy saying, oh, that'll be me. Thanks. The most Hawaiian guy the Senate has ever seen, except for, of course, Mazie Hirono. Wait a second. Let me get a picture of Mazie Hirono because she is also Hawaiian looking. And I just would like to compare. I just like to compare Hawaiian looking people so that, none of us are from Hawaii. Hawaii is like a foreign land. And truth be told, with the things that we found out over the last few years, you got to assume that Hawaii probably is a foreign land, but whatever. So this is Mazie Hirono. She is Hawaiian looking, as you can see. But let's get back to Brian Schatz, who is also quite Hawaiian looking. There he is. Totally Hawaiian, right up here, especially. All right. Senator Brian Schatz of Hawaii said he would place a blanket hold on all of President Trump's State Department nominees until the administration's attack on the leading U.S. foreign assistance agency ends. a move that threatens to stall Trump's ability to get his foreign policy team in place. So the Senate would make it so that Donald Trump can't have his team in place unless USAID gets to continue operating the way it's always been operating, overthrowing foreign nations without the military. And just think about how great it is to be able to overthrow foreign nations without the military. Just think about how great it was when the CIA could direct special operations on their own, except Donald Trump in administration number 1 took that away. It's almost like he knew about USAID even before Doge told him. The Senate typically speeds up the confirmation process of many nominees through unanimous consent, a process that bypasses a formal vote if no senator objects. By objecting, Schatz's hold would halt the Senate's ability to move nominees quickly, requiring Senate Majority Leader John Thune to use precious floor time to advance the president's picks through the confirmation process. I mean, precious floor time? There is no precious floor time in the illegitimate Senate. It's not even a real thing. Precious floor time. Hey, Senate, if you want to be able to make rules by which the American people live, especially on behalf of a foreign occupied power, take however much time it takes. Imagine saying that you have the authority to create rules for other people, but it has to be done on your terms. Oh, man. Oh, we don't have enough time for that. Sorry. We're too busy passing gun legislation, even though the Constitution says shall not be infringed. We don't have time to do another thing that the Constitution also says. We're too busy violating the Constitution in these ways to violate the Constitution in that way. This is our government. And yet, people believe it's legitimate despite fake elections. And they still grovel and say that our solutions must somehow come through this illegitimate government. They tell you that they have organizations that aren't actually accountable to the government and hence the people. They don't have to give you information. They don't even have to do things to benefit America or the American people. They can 100% just be an anti-American force in the government. Legitimately anti-American, like through policy and agenda. It's not about making political claims saying, oh, Democrats are anti-American, Republicans are anti-American, all that nonsense that the media always does. Not that the people aren't anti-American, they certainly are. But this is just baseline, literal anti-American. The policy is specifically anti-American. If it doesn't have to benefit America, then it shouldn't be a policy. And if they're justifying an anti-American policy by saying that they're not required to do things in the interest of Americans because they have their own bigger long-term interests that they're working on behalf of, then the policy is anti-American, right? If it's not benefiting Americans, the American people, then the government shouldn't be doing it if it's a government of, by, and for the people or a constitutional government. It's not either of those things. We should realize that. We just live in a communist state. But let's continue. There's no way I'm going to get through all this stuff today. That is 100% certain. But we're going to give it a shot for a little while longer, and we're just going to see how it goes. Politico today. I think today. Yes. U.S. to again withdraw from the UN Human Rights Council, stop UN RWA funding. President Donald Trump is expected to issue an executive order on Tuesday withdrawing the U.S. from the UN Human Rights Council and prohibiting future funding for the UN Relief Agency for Gaza, according to a document obtained by Politico. So we are withdrawing from global governance organizations, and this is just a week and a half after he appeared virtually before the World Economic Forum and let them know that they were presiding over the end of globalism and they had better all go ahead and fight for whatever lifeboats remain for people who didn't see this coming or were warned countless times, and make the right decision in advance. The actions which reinstate policies in place during the last Trump administration, oh, how about that? Will come on the day the president is set to meet with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Wow, losing my voice. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Washington. The U.S. has long accused the Council of bias against Israel and of giving cover to governments with human rights abuses. It comes after the Biden administration paused funding to UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East. It's a lot. Known as UNRWA, following reports that staffers were involved in the October 7th attack by Hamas on Israel. That, of course, is the Paragliding Go-Kart Incident that Rahm Emanuel described as payback, I guess, or a threat against Our Boy Yoo-hoo, because he was going after the Shin Bet. That's pretty amazing. So, another global governing body that Trump is moving away from. Remember, he has also paused for 90 days all foreign aid, except, of course, I know to Israel and Egypt and maybe Jordan. We also have Trump leaving the WHO. And then Elon Musk was also going after this weekend the National Endowment for Democracy, which is, if you have paid attention to Mike Benz over the last few years, another one of these kind of quasi-governmental organizations that operates for the purposes of subversion. And Elise Stefanik, of all people, was on their board. She is being appointed UN ambassador, which is interesting because the person who had that position in Donald Trump's first publicly recognized term was Nikki Haley. And most people see Nikki Haley as almost an avatar of neoconservatism, militant neoconservatism at this point. So we'll have to keep an eye on Elise Stefanik. A lot of people have been doing that all along because she is incredibly pro-Israel and kind of used to be a globalist Democrat and may well still be. Let us switch to the fake country of Ukraine and the comedic actor continuing to play president in Ukraine, despite having the entire world recognize no legitimacy behind him whatsoever, beyond the fact that he is the guy who is still often referred to as president. It's really crazy. Even supporters of the Uniparty in America understand that there was no election in Ukraine and Zelensky is just maintaining his position there. And it might be our boy comedic actor in Ukraine. We've been talking about this for years. It seems more and more likely over time. The neocons who used to support Volodymyr Zelensky and say that he's the next Churchill and all of that are kind of beginning to realize that maybe he's not as good of friends as they all thought. Now he's speaking Ukrainian here again. It's subtitled. Let's see how this goes.
Дивіться.
So he's saying, when I hear, and I heard before, today we hear from the United States of America that America gave Ukraine hundreds of billions, 177 billion to be more precise. That's what the exact figure sounded like, which was supported or voted by Congress, etc. Look, as the president of a warring country, I tell you, we received just over 75 billion. That is 100 billion of these 177 or 200. Some people even say we've never received. And this is important because we are talking about specific things. Because we got it not with money, but with weapons. There's training, there's additional transport, and there are not only prices for weapons. And he goes on to explain the weapons and what some of that other money ultimately brought in. But the point is that far less money than what we were told was promised to Ukraine actually made it there. They were being sent all of these old weapons. The money was actually going to American defense contractors to build our new defense infrastructure, while old weapons were going to, quote unquote, the Ukraine, or being sold off on the black market, or who knows what. A very interesting plan, and we'll see how that goes in the future, particularly if all of that was a defense or energy infrastructure for our technological future that goes even beyond simply replacing all of the old kind of kinetic warfare options and weapons and materiel that was passed to Ukraine. An interesting mystery that will unravel to some extent further in the future. This is the Associated Press over the weekend. Zelensky tells the Associated Press, Zelensky says the URL headline is different now than the actual headline that is updated. Zelensky says excluding Ukraine from U.S.-Russia talks about war is very dangerous. And we don't have to go too deep into this, but let's just do a couple paragraphs here. And the real point is what it means if a country at war is not in the negotiations to end its own war. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said Saturday that excluding his country from talks between the U.S. and Russia about the war in Ukraine would be very dangerous, and asked for more discussions between Kyiv and Washington to develop a plan for a ceasefire. Speaking in an exclusive interview with the Associated Press, Zelensky said Russia does not want to engage in ceasefire talks or to discuss any kind of concessions, which the Kremlin interprets as losing at a time when its troops have the upper hand on the battlefield. So they're not going to give anything away because they are winning so dominantly on the battlefield. And now that is just admitted by everyone. He said U.S. President Donald Trump could bring Russian President Vladimir Putin to the table with the threat of sanctions targeting Russia's energy and banking system, as well as continued support of the Ukrainian military. I think these are the closest and most important steps. Okay. So the continued support of the military, he's saying they didn't actually really get the support they thought they were getting. That's the first thing. And then he suggests that the United States under Donald Trump might do further sanctions against Russia. Russia, of course, is a BRICS nation, and we'll come back to that. But let's hit another Marco Rubio statement from this week. From this morning, actually, I think.
Brazil, in our hemisphere, largest country in the Western Hemisphere south of us, cut a trade deal with China. They're going to, from now on, do trade in their own currencies, get right around the dollar. They're creating a secondary economy in the world, totally independent of the United States. We won't have to talk about sanctions in 5 years because there'll be so many countries transacting in currencies other than the dollar that we won't have the ability to sanction them.
Well, how about that? That's something we've been talking about for years on this podcast. The emergence of the multipolar world, moving away from the centralized and centralizing fiat banking regime worldwide would mean that economic warfare can no longer be waged against these countries. That's the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, Donald Trump's Secretary of State, for now at least, saying quite clearly, in a few years, we're not going to be able to sanction these other countries. Maybe this is a warning to the regime. We need to stop all this now. Otherwise, it's all going to go through, and that'll be that. And hopefully, in a decentralized future, maybe we have the opportunity to actually get away from that. That would be amazing. But he's saying it quite clearly right there. So is Donald Trump going to sanction Russia to change the leverage in the Ukraine war? No, there's no chance of that. Worth mentioning, by the way, right now, Donald Trump put out a statement on BRICS over the weekend. Okay. Or actually, this was on Thursday. So in advance of all of this stuff of our boy comedic actor saying what he said, and in advance of Rubio talking about how sanctions won't be possible anymore, Trump says the idea that the BRICS countries are trying to move away from the dollar while we stand by and watch is over. We are going to require a commitment from these seemingly hostile countries that they will neither create a new BRICS currency nor back any other currency to replace the mighty US dollar, or they will face 100% tariffs and should expect to say goodbye to selling into the wonderful US economy. They can go find another sucker nation. There's no chance that BRICS will replace the US dollar in international trade or anywhere else. And any country that tries should say hello to tariffs and goodbye to America. Now, the tariffs get threatened, then the situation gets resolved. That's what we've seen repeating over and over again. Maybe we'll get into some of the tariffs today, maybe not. But this is some kind of mild threat. It is a narrative seeding for the future about BRICS nations. Don't develop a currency outside the currency we're all on. I would be surprised if the US dollar doesn't end up being backed by Bitcoin, maybe gold, but I think Bitcoin. And I think we've seen plenty of signs that BRICS countries intend to do the exact same thing. Now, does that mean there's one global currency underlying everything being Bitcoin? I don't think so. That's going to be kind of its own thing. And then countries will have their own currencies that are transacted with. And if you think of Bitcoin more as digital gold than as a currency, which I think makes sense, then that's what it could potentially be. And we shall see. Refer to my comments from last week on that virtually abandoned episode about the technological future. The last hour and 15 or so is on that. And the same principle would apply here. So the ability for the US to sanction other countries and get them to then do as they are told by the global regime is going away. But importantly here, what does it mean that the Ukraine, it used to be the Ukraine, now it's just Ukraine, so that everybody knows it's its own independent country. It used to be the Soviet Socialist Republic of Ukraine. Ukraine also means the outer lands. Kyiv was the capital of Russia. I believe it was like in the 1100s. So the lands being fought over, quote unquote, have been Russia, recognized by the world for 2.5 years now as Russia. And we're still supposed to pretend it's Ukraine. But critically, Ukraine is not in the discussions to negotiate the end of their own war, which means that this was never about the interests of the brave Ukrainian people or Ukraine's sovereign borders. Ukraine is, for all intents and purposes, not a real country. It's a global proxy state. I'm not saying that there's not a people there that are part of Russia. Russia has plenty of distinct people that are still part of Russia. Just like the United States used to have distinct people that were part of the United States in different parts of the country, because they were all initially their own states, their own nations. And that's how they used to be referred to. And then they were unified in some way under the American mythology that is our birthright and that we must return to. And there are times where it seems like Russia is more representative of that than many parts of our society are. And the awakening reduces that continuously over time, which is a wonderful thing. But people totally subscribed to the regime's agenda are definitionally not subscribed to the American mythology. It's not even an insult. It's not a compliment to Russia. It's that country seems to be doing what we are told we do. And we seem to be doing all the things we're told Russia and China and all those bad Middle Eastern places and all those bad African places, all backwards, all the Latin American and South American dictators. How are we doing all the bad things that we're told they're doing while they're doing the things to stand up for their nation that we're told we do? Because we're definitely not doing those things. It's very strange. Ukraine gets no say in the outcome of the negotiations or even in the negotiations of their own war. Well, that means they're not fighting their own war. And it's not them fighting it, because then they could simply walk off the battlefield. Except, of course, we've heard that the Azov battalion will just brutally murder them if they do that. And maybe that's true, to the extent that the fighting is or was true. And I think it's more likely that it was true from 2014 on, and then was solved. And then we're seeing the narrative play out all about that. And throughout that narrative, we found out, oh, hey, wait, it's the global regime. They're the real Nazis. They're the Nazis they always claim that we're about to become. They're the terrorists they always claim we're about to become. And it's weird because all the Nazis and terrorists are always trained by the CIA, and we're not exactly trained by the CIA, although we are brainwashed by them, and maybe it's the same thing. It all comes back around in a vicious, vicious circle. I'm going to check in and see how everybody's doing in the chat here. Seems like everybody's okay. Okay. We'll go through just a couple more things, and then we'll have to probably give it up for the day. This is Fox News over the weekend. Panama pledges to end key canal deal with China. Work with U.S. after Rubio visit. Amazing, amazing, amazing. So China, one of our greatest adversaries, was controlling the Panama Canal just like Donald Trump said they were. And now they're going to leave without any war with the United States. Man, what incredible leverage Donald Trump must have. Am I right? I mean, this is exactly what we talked about over the last few weeks with the Panama Canal. And it's exactly what we've talked about for years regarding Donald Trump's relationship with China and the threat that China and Russia and some of these other countries pose with the United States of America. Now, people haven't gotten around to accepting it with China yet, the way most of them have when it comes to Russia or Saudi Arabia or Hungary or whatever other sovereign nation we're supposed to be threatened by. But sooner or later, North Korea, Iran, China, people will understand that the same thing is happening there. We're going to see the stories play out so that people can learn them in real time and see our own quasi-governmental organizations causing the actual problems that we're told about in these countries, just like we did with Ukraine, same model over and over again. And we might have to see it, which would mean more chaos in society and more gaslighting from the white hats. Or we can recognize the pattern and understand that what we've been told throughout our entire lives about China and North Korea and Iran, etc., we're all told to us by the same people on all the same logic they gave us for everything else and the same logic with which they go after Donald Trump. So if we recognize the pattern, then we can fast forward to the conclusion of all of those. And then if the narrative has to play out, we can watch the narrative play out, knowing what the conclusion is so we don't freak out. And then we can just observe and talk about what that narrative actually means to people. Hey, don't freak out about this. You know what? It's actually this. You just go through the entire timeline of the war, saying, look, another example of the global regime doing that which they accuse others of doing. At some point, we're going to have to realize that if Donald Trump can wave his magic wand that he used to talk about, or snap his fingers or do his little dance, and China will leave one of the most important choke points of global trade immediately, then China's not our adversary. And there's not going to be a war with China. That should be so obvious. But for some reason, it isn't, because the official story within the central narrative is drilled in so hard that people will back that up despite it being obliterated. And like, you can see it being obliterated. This is one of those moments where you just have to think for yourself. And if you don't agree with me, don't agree with me. But if you don't agree with me because you just can't accept that China aren't all bad guys, well, that's crazy. And you can look into the Uyghur thing, by the way. You'll see that there's a terrorist operation in Xinjiang run by the global regime to carve out another proxy area where they can run things outside of the oversight of the superstate. And they'll probably do it here as well. They haven't done it here yet. I mean, maybe they have on some level. We'll see as this year and next progress what things will be like in a place like California. Though it seems like our boy New it's not like he's saying good things in public. I'm not suggesting he's a different man and has a different agenda. I'm suggesting that he is doing as he is told, and that's it. And Karen Bass seems to be the same status. A lot of these people seem to be the same status. So when the TV characters are telling you to get super emotional about people like Karen Bass and then use that emotion to support someone like Rick Caruso, you should not only be suspicious of the TV characters, you should be suspicious of the person they're supporting. And the TV characters are on Twitter as well. Mike Cernovich was doing the pro Caruso op. I would be very suspicious of all that. But one thing that's not going to happen is the United States of America going to war with China. Panama's president vowed Sunday to end a key development deal with China after meeting with Secretary of State Marco Rubio and after complaints from President Donald Trump that the Latin American country had ceded control over its critical shipping canal to Beijing. Jose Raul Mulino, Panama's president, said his nation's sovereignty over the 51-mile waterway, which connects the Pacific and the Caribbean, will remain unchanged. But he said he would not renew a 2017 memorandum of understanding to join China's Belt and Road Global Initiative, and that Panama would instead look to work more closely with the U.S. So the Belt and Road Initiative is breaking down, just like the rest of globalism is breaking down. Whose globalism is that? And was all that infrastructure built by the globalists? Is all that infrastructure going to simply be taken back for those sovereign nations for them to use on their own for the benefit of their own prosperity? It may well be. We shall see. Maybe it'll just be regions of responsibility. Maybe the world just works with only superstates. I don't know. We shall see. But the Belt and Road Initiative going away and globalism broadly going away, the banking regime's influence going away. These are incredible advancements in the world and stuff that we have been observing for years now as we have been on this path. So Trump has made it very clear that the U.S. has the right to watch over the Panama Canal and to exert some sort of influence over it. And so I had to ask the machine whether or not that was true, because he mentioned the Torrijos-Carter treaties signed in 1977. Those provide the U.S. with certain rights and responsibilities regarding the canal, even after the transfer of full control to Panama. While the treaties do not explicitly address the issue of Chinese influence, they do contain provisions that could potentially be invoked by an American president in response to perceived threats to the canal's neutrality and security. And so regime media, members of the regime, members of the Uniparty in the U.S. have been telling us that Donald Trump has nothing to do with this. He can't do anything. This is Panama's Canal. You can't mess with Panama's Canal. And it turns out that these treaties actually do allow him to do that. an American president could potentially justify military action to protect the canal. The treaties state that the United States has the right to defend the canal against any threat to its neutrality. Specifically, the United States has the right to act against any aggression or threat directed against the canal or against the peaceful transit of vessels through the canal. Now, if the regime, China, quote unquote, but that language being used to mean the regime had control over the canal and they had the ability to cut off and restrict access to this choke point, then it's easier for them controlling trade routes around the world to implement a worldwide boycott, just like they did in the 1930s in Germany. And it worked. Well, it worked because the regime was controlling the two critical sides there. In this case, hopefully that's not true. And hopefully the people will not fall for the pro-Hitler op and make this all about race or ethnicity or religion when it is really about regime and other factors. And some of that is tied to those things. Don't get me wrong. But if you can control the trade routes, then you can restrict access, which means countries can't get the things that they need, and companies within those countries can't get the things that they need, and the economy is ground to a halt. And of course, that's what they're going to try to do to the United States. Donald Trump's not allowing that to be possible. And probably this was set up with Xi in 2020. What other explanation could there be for the Chinese leaving and giving control to Donald Trump? And he's going to control all the way around Greenland and all the way around Canada and around Alaska. So all the way up and down. They're building other ways to get across from sea to sea, which is good because it's good for industry and it's good for trade. It's not like we don't like trade. It's that we don't like top-down trade with centralized control by the global regime. Okay, we're hitting 3 hours. So I'm going to wrap it for today. Things are happening so fast and furious. I guess I'm just going to keep doing these and hope that we, at some point, will catch up or at least get enough in there to understand the big picture. I'm not so concerned with every issue of the day. So many different podcasts are talking about all that stuff. The mainstream media is talking about all that stuff. So I don't think anybody's coming to me for the news. I think that we want to continue focusing on presenting the big picture here and focusing on the breakdown of the global regime, our elections, the return to the founding mythology and to the purpose of those founding documents, the way the founders intended. We can follow those narrative through lines without going through the news each and every day. So with that, I'm quickly checking the chat here. Doc from Amish PA says, $10 says, almost made it into the live stream. Great second half of the show, my guy. Thank you very much, my friend. And I believe that is that. Snowcat Operator hit a few subscriptions for people in the chat. So thank you very much again for that. I will be back on Wednesday for the subscriber stream at 3 p.m. Eastern. So the same reasonable time on the same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic, and Joe Biden will never be president.
Well,
what?
You know who I am, don't you?
Well, you ain't Fiona Apple, and if you ain't Fiona Apple, I don't give a rat's ass.
Ah!
And what's wrong with being an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times? What do you think, Max?
Do you want to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times?
Yeah, I think I'd like to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times.
It's not true. It's more true than I would perhaps prefer.
And I will not let you down.
We do a little trolling. It's called We Do a Little Trolling.
What? In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening for free and would like to support the show, the best way to do that is by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can find the info stream over on Telegram at t.me/veryreasonable. The merch site is cancelcouture.com, and for all my other links, you can visit linktree.com/imyourmoderator. And I'll see you soon. Down on the range.